ago, but the modern day originator is St. Thomas Aquinas, still the best explainer of the natural law. But John Locke picked up on this, and Thomas Jefferson picked up on it when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and James Madison picked up on it when he was the scrivener for the Constitution. Jefferson's version of Moore's phrase is this: we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if Jefferson's correct, if this isn't just some musing, and by the way, the Declaration of Independence is a statute enacted by the Congress. If you go to the first book of the U.S. Code and go to the first page, you'll see there the Declaration of Independence. Probably the most violated statute by the government that we have, even though it's the first and the oldest. But it articulates the view that our rights come from our humanity. What are these rights that come from our humanity? And if they come from our humanity, how can the government trample them? Well, the concept of natural rights articulated by Aquinas is this: that there are areas of human behavior for which we do not need a government permission slip in order to make free choices in those areas. So things like the freedom to develop your personality. I told O'Reilly he should be grateful for that freedom. The freedom to develop your personality, the right to think as you wish, the right to say what you think, the right to publish your thoughts, the right to worship or not to worship, the right to assemble in groups, the right to refuse to assemble in groups, the right to petition the government for a redress of your differences, the right to defend yourself. I must tell you, the right to defend yourself, the right to keep and bear arms, does not protect your right to shoot deer. It protects your right to shoot at the government when it is taken over by tyrants. These are the quintessential American right. I'm going down the Bill of Rights. The quintessential American right. The right to be left alone. Codified in the Fourth Amendment. Today called the right to privacy. Codified in the Fourth Amendment. We all know what has happened to privacy. Let's see. How many of us have these in your pocket? Keep it on. I want the NSA and the president to hear everything I'm telling you. Now, I started by saying keep it on. Here's the sad thing. It doesn't have to be on for them to listen to us. When I used to say this about Blackberries and iPhones a couple of years ago, people would say, oh, there he goes again. He's off his meds. He's hanging out with Lou Rockwell too much. But today we all know this is true. Today we know that our popularly elected government has such profound disregard for our natural rights that it tramples them to extremes beyond which even George Orwell could have imagined in 1984. Without getting into the NSA, another topic for another time. If Aquinas was right, and if Jefferson was right, and these rights come from our humanity and not from the government, things like thought and speech and privacy and travel, how can the government trample them? Well, the theory of our government is that we have surrendered some of our rights to the government so that the government will protect the rights that we have not surrendered. That's the idea of the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed. Does anyone in this room know anyone now living who consented to the government? Well, the answer is no. It's inconceivable that anybody still living was around when the Constitution was enacted and consented to it. So right off the bat, the idea that the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed is like government itself, a fiction. The fiction is that we have consented to the surrender of our rights. The reality is that our rights have been stolen from us because the government monopolizes force. It's a sad and terrible reality, but it is reality. In theory, when the Constitution was enacted, and there's a typo in the Constitution, I get in trouble for saying this, the third word is wrong. It says, we the people. Of course, the Constitution was not enacted by the people, it was enacted by the states. But that was never corrected. Nevertheless, whatever was surrendered to the federal government was limited to 16 discrete, unique, separate, stated, articulated powers in the Constitution. And then the Ninth Amendment says, just because we've listed a bunch of rights in the first 8 doesn't mean that there are many others. It would be impossible for us to list them all. And the 10th Amendment says, just because we've given some power to the federal government, we the states, doesn't mean that we kept the rest of it for ourselves. We have. That's the concept of limited government. The government must stop when it wants to touch our natural rights. And the list of natural rights, whatever you think our natural rights are, give me the list. I'll add 30 or 40 to them. Because these are the things we all yearn as human beings to do, free from interference by the government. If they belong to us as human beings, like my fingers belong to me, then they cannot be taken away by majority vote. They cannot be taken away by legislation. They cannot be taken away by the command of the executive. They can only be taken away if I give them up myself. I can give them up myself by robbing a bank. I rob a bank. I violate the natural rights of the depositors of the bank. I can then be prosecuted and have my freedom of movement taken away. So I have surrendered my natural rights when I gambled that I could get away with that loot from the bank. I could also sign a contract in which I give away some of my natural rights, and I've done that with my bosses at Fox. Theoretically, I'm supposed to say only what they want me to say. In return, they send me a check every week. You know, the checks keep coming, even though I obviously don't always say everything they want me to say. So you can voluntarily surrender your own natural rights for whatever good you choose to surrender them for. But you can't surrender somebody else's natural rights, because natural rights are owned by individuals, by persons, not collectively, not by groups, not by the government, but by individuals. That is at least the theory of the Declaration of Independence and the theory of the Constitution, and was at least the theory of the framers, the founding generation of the United States of America. Regrettably, it is no longer the theory today. And this assault on natural rights began immediately. In the presidency of John Adams, the government suddenly had this bizarre fear of the French. I know this sounds incongruous today, but the country was afraid of the French. So they enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts, which basically said, if you want to become a citizen here, come. If you own an acre of land, you can become a citizen immediately, except if you're French. You have to wait 14 years. By the way, if you criticize the president, the government, the Congress, or the courts, you can go to jail for 2 years. Well, how could the same generation that wrote Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, in some cases the very same human beings who wrote that, in fact, abridge the freedom of speech? Because the world looks very different when you're on the outside trying to acquire power than when you have power and you've forgotten about those promises you made to get there. In this room, after I finish, is the Thomas Jefferson of our day, who never forgot his promises. Sadly, an exception, because today the government tramples natural rights. Today the government, to which none of us has consented, claims it has the authority by majority vote to assault those liberties that are a part of our humanity. You don't have to believe in a traditional true-line God as I do in order to accept this. You don't have to believe in any God in order to accept this. If you believe that humanity is the highest and best virtuous good on the planet, then you believe that humanity, each human being, is the source of his or her own rights. If you believe, as Jefferson and Aquinas and I, that we are creatures of an all-knowing, all-loving God who made us in his image and likeness, and as he is perfectly free, we are perfectly free, and our rights come directly from him, in either way, the rights are ours and not the government's to be taken away.